There was a cloud on the countenance of Mr. Bob Sawyer as he sat by the fire, and there was a sympathizing expression, too, in the features of his chum, Mr. Benjamin Allen, and melancholy in his voice as he said, "It is unlucky that your landlady, Mrs. Rattle, should have taken it into her head to turn sour just on this occasion. She might at least have waited till tomorrow. That's her malevolence," said Mr. Bob Sawyer. "That's her malevolence. She says that if I can afford to give a party, I ought to be able to afford to pay her confounded little bill. How long has it been running? Only a quarter and a month or so." Mr. Benjamin Allen coughed and directed a searching glance at the stove. "It'll be a deuced unpleasant thing if she takes it into her head to let out when those fellows are here, won't it?" "Horrible," said Mr. Bob Sawyer. "Horrible." Here there came a low tap at the room door, and Mr. Bob Sawyer looked expressively at his friend and bade the tapper come in, whereupon a dirty, slipshod girl in black cotton stockings thrust in her head and said, "Please, Mr. Sawyer, Mrs. Rattle wants to speak to you." Woo! Before Mr. Bob Sawyer could return an answer, this young person suddenly disappeared with a jerk, as if somebody had given her a violent pull behind. This mysterious exit was no sooner accomplished when there was another knock at the door. Mr. Bob Sawyer looked at his friend with a glance of abject apprehension, and once more said, "Come in." This permission was not at all necessary, for before Mr. Bob Sawyer had uttered the words, a little fierce woman bounced into the room, all in a tremble with passion and pale with rage. "Now, Mr. Sawyer, if you'll have the goodness to settle that little bill of mine, I'll thank you, because I've got my rent to pay today, and my landlord's awaiting below stairs now. I'm very sorry if it's any inconvenience, Mrs. Rattle, but it isn't any inconvenience. I didn't want it particular before today, leastways as it has to go to my landlord directly. It was as well for you to keep it as me. You promised me this afternoon, Mr. Sawyer, and every gentleman who has ever lived here has kept his word, sir, as of course anybody who calls himself a gentleman do. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Rattle, but the fact is that I have been disappointed in this city today. Astonishing place, that city. Extraordinary number of men always being disappointed there. Oh, Mr. Sawyer, and what is that to me, sir? I have no doubt, Mrs. Rattle, that before the middle of next week we shall be able to set ourselves quite square and go on a better system afterwards. This was all Mrs. Rattle wanted. She had bustled up to the apartment of the unlucky Bob, so bent upon going into a passion that in all probability payment would have rather disappointed her. She was in excellent form for a little relaxation of the kind, having just passed a few introductory compliments with Mr. Rattle in the front kitchen. "Do you suppose, Mr. Sawyer," elevating her voice for the information of the neighbours, "do you suppose as I'm a-going day after day to let a fellow occupy my lodgings as never thinks of paying his rent, nor the very money laid out for the fresh butter and lump sugar that's bought for his breakfast, nor the very milk that's took in at the street door? Do you suppose as an honest and hard-working, industrious woman which has lived in this street for 20 year, 9 year over the way, and 10 year and 3/4 in this very house, has nothing better to do but to work herself to death for a parcel of lazy, idle fellows that are always smoking and drinking and lounging, when they ought to be glad to turn their hands to anything as would help 'em to to pay their bills. My good soul, interposed Mr. Benjamin Allen, have the goodness to confine your observations to yourself, sir, or I beg, suddenly halting the rapid torrent of her speech and addressing the third party with impressive slowness and solemnity. I am not aware, sir, that you have any right to address your conversation to me. I don't think I let these apartments to you, sir. No, you certainly did not. Very good, sir. Then perhaps, sir, as a medical student, you'll confine yourself to breaking the arms and the legs of the poor people in the hospitals, and will keep yourself to yourself, sir, or there may be some here as will make you, sir. But, but you are such an unreasonable woman. I beg your pardon, young man, but will you have the goodness to call me that again, sir? I didn't make use of the word in any invidious sense, ma'am. I beg your pardon, young man. But who do you call a woman? Did you address that remark to me, sir? Why, bless my soul. Did you apply that name to me? I ask of you, sir, with intense ferocity, and throwing the door wide open. Why, of course I did. Yes, of course you did. Backing gradually towards the door and raising her voice for the special behoof of Mr. Rattle in the kitchen. Yes, of course you did. And everybody knows as you may safely insult me in my own house, while my husband sits sleeping downstairs and taking no more notice than if I was a dog in the streets. He ought to be ashamed of himself. That allows his wife to be treated in this way by a parcel of young cutters and carvers of live people's bodies, that disgraces the lodgings. And leaving her exposed to all manner of abuse. A base, faint-hearted, timorous wretch is afraid to come upstairs and face the ruffiany creatures. That's afraid. That's afraid. That's afraid to come. Mrs. Rattle paused to listen whether the repetition of this taunt had roused her better half, and finding that it had not been successful, proceeded to descend the stairs with sobs innumerable.